Start. We are running a few minutes late, but that's okay. The weather is atrocious, so we have to give people time to hop in. And so welcome everyone to the Sussex Humanities Lab, everyone that's in the room and everyone online as well. Welcome to our seminar series called Disrupting AI. We're delighted to have Dan McQuillan with us today. So Dan will be speaking for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll have a respondent who is Adrian Smith from SPRU, and then we'll open the floor up to Q&A. So if you have questions, hold on to them, put them in the chat, and we can ask Dan and Adrian as well. So just a kind of a brief introduction to the lab for those of you who haven't been here before, and if those of you have been here, welcome back. And then I'll introduce Dan. I'm Sharon Webb. I'm one of the co-directors of the Sussex Humanities Lab, and this is the Sussex Humanities Lab. So we are a research program, one of 4 research programs of the University of Sussex. And we have a specific tagline, so I'm going to read it out just in case I get it wrong. So we experiment with digital methods in research, and we investigate the interactions between technology, culture, society, and environment in order to imagine and create more sustainable and just futures for all. So in many ways, we are a digital humanities lab, a digital humanities plus, because we do more than DH. We've got a number of research clusters, which include eco-ecologies, experimental ecologies, algorithms, and AI, as well as critical digital humanities and archives. So part of the kind of remit of the lab is to think about, research that we want to engage with. And obviously this is, why Dan is here as part of our seminar program. And if you want to, this is a plug, if you want to read more about the lab, we have just published our annual report. So anyone who's in this space, is a QR code at the back, and you can get a printed copy there as well. And anyone who is new to the lab as well, we also have what is the Sussex Humanities Lab flyer. It has some really nice information about how you might engage with us, including, attending our seminars and coming to our research forums and our, various bid surgeries and data surgeries. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to introduce Dan. So Dan did a PhD in experimental particle physics, then worked with people with mental health problems and learning disabilities. They've worked for the NHS and for Amnesty International, and they've run hacker camps in the Caucasus and the Youth Citizen Science Project in Kosovo. They are now a lecturer in computing. So I'll hand over to Dan.
Thanks very much. Based with me on screen, slightly intimidating. At least I'm in the right place. So I'm going to start with the plug as well, or at least a contextualization. I'm going to be referring to this book basically, which is called Resisting AI, subtitled An Anti-Fascist Approach to Artificial Intelligence. Slightly intimidating. Yeah. So I wrote Resisting AI as a response to seeing AI promoted as a solution to pretty much everything. And I wrote it because AI isn't a matter of ethics, it's a matter of technopolitics. So the focus of the book is not the nature of intelligence, but the part that actual AI is playing in shaping our lived experience and our future life chances. So the focus of the book is not. So the AI I'm referring to is tech-like deep learning, so that family. And my focus is on the resonance between what this kind of AI can actually do. So the AI I'm referring to is the resonances between that and the surrounding social conditions, especially the particular forms of crisis that we're currently experiencing. So AI as we know it, which is largely at this moment in time, that family of technologies, deep learning and reinforcement learning and so forth. AI as we know it is a form of imitation, driven by statistical optimization. You feed it training data and examples of the required output, and it figures out how to emulate them. And it can do so in some pretty generative ways, like the AI art from stable diffusion models. I don't know if anyone played with stable diffusion models, right? So deep learning, it's a clever trick, which with some obvious drawbacks. The primary one being garbage in, garbage out. But the downsides, that's what I'm trying to argue, the downsides go way beyond problems with racist data to the very representationalism that these systems rely on. The algorithms of AI, like backpropagation, mean it's inherently opaque. Even the engineers who create the AI don't really know what's going on inside. And it's just not very smart, in that it requires a shed load of computing and tons of data to grind out a result. So having AI requires, at the very least, a surveillance society that sucks up data and server farms that burn through electricity at a truly eye-watering rate. What it offers is a generalizable solution machine. The input could be the works of Shakespeare or a year's worth of transport data. It can apply the same computations to churn out correlations that connect the data to the targets. We get a glimpse of the potential problems from the final layer of a typical neural network, where a so-called softmax function turns the densely entangled output of the previous layers into a discrete vector whose elements sum to one, which for me highlights the way AI can work internally with fluid deterritorializations and still deliver a binary output that can be implemented as a segregation. Now, maybe we could accommodate AI's downsides if the product was some profound insights. But AI is very brittle and has a tendency to break if the world decides to be a bit different to its training data. Pretty much all the claims that AI can do important things better, like the claim that we won't need radiologists anymore because AI will do a better job of reading X-rays, turned out to be plausible in the lab and a flop in the real world. AI's reliance on proxies means it can easily go astray, and forcing optimization, which is what the maths does, means it has a tendency to cheat and can be made to reproduce conspiratorial patterns, like matching facial features to criminal tendencies. Judith Butler pointed out that our identities and identifications are the product of what she called the sedimenting effect of regulated iterability. Now, that's pretty much a product spec for AI. Machine learning and AI are spreading into every area of lived experience, as we know. And I'm suggesting their performative loops of prediction intervention will start to alter our sense of how we should act in order to be who we are. Engineers in AI, in general, will claim that any biases can be fixed by statistical rebalancing. But they want to do this without reflecting on the structural injustices that are being channeled in the first place. Irrespective of human rights commitments, the optimizations of AI excel by finding actual differences and amplifying them. Companies, unsurprisingly perhaps, issue a smokescreen of ethical principles. But AI ethics is a subfield of AI realism. The widespread sense that not only is AI the only viable future system, but also that it is now pretty much impossible to even imagine a coherent alternative to it. Meanwhile, lawyers rush to design regulations, debating endlessly over how best to define deviations from the norm, when the norm itself is the problem. It's not that the law is failing to regulate algorithms, but rather that algorithms are exposing the failure of the law to address real underlying injustice. AI isn't a clean break with the past or a leap into a sci-fi future. It's an intensification of power relations by amping up what's sometimes called the view from nowhere. It's based on quantification, abstraction, and reduction. So it has an air of scientific authority, promoted as a kind of machinic Neoplatonism, revealing a hidden mathematical order that's superior to our direct experience. But AI isn't realist, it's instrumentalist. It only models the world to get something out of it. And its operations of boundary drawing are really forms of precaritization. It's no coincidence that AI has blossomed under austerity, because it also claims to do more with less, because what it's good at is data-driven triage. The nature of its computations bring the same logics of speculation that caused the financial crash in the first place into predictions about everyday life. The nature of its computation. Machine learning is already being used in the digital transformation of welfare states, boosting up bureaucratic indifference and cruelty under the cover of AI superiority and algorithmic obfuscation. Boosting up bureaucratic indifference and cruelty under the cover of AI. The real products of AI are increased thoughtlessness, social automatism, and statistical stigmatization. That's thoughtlessness in the sense that Hannah Arendt meant it. The inability to critique instructions, a lack of reflection on consequences, and a commitment to the belief that the correct ordering is being carried out. AI won't just reproduce race, class, and gender, it will matrix multiply them in the search for optimized workers to exploit and racialized others to expropriate. AI's character as a racializing technology bolstered by science-like activity means it also operates as a return of race science, with the capacity to conceal structural relations by blaming racialized outgroups. The application of machine learning and AI becomes epistemic, administrative, and structural violence, which is bad enough. But what we need to ask is what this means when it's part of a wider set of socio-political changes. What kind of politics will find most use for AI's transformative violence? AI acts with the force of the law without being of the law. Its divisions produce states of exception through recursive redlining, everywhere from Airbnb to national borders. The blurring of material and algorithmic constraints, whether in predictive policing or in the Amazon warehouse, extends the logic of carcerality. It turns out that the new normal is the normalization of neural networks, where AI becomes a form of necropolitics, figuring out the long-term distribution of life chances, intensifying the dynamic of organized neglect through designations of unproductive disposability. Let's not forget that the origin of machine learning's basic maths, such as linear regression and correlation coefficients, were developed by Victorians like Galton and Pearson, who were committed eugenicists. The idea of artificial general intelligence, that's the dream of AI idealists, comes from the same lineage as IQ and the ranking of people into superior and inferior breeds. The same patriarchal and racial supremacy finds Silicon Valley outlets in rationalism, accelerationism, and long-termism, as the intellectual dark web's defense of sedimented privilege follows a gradient descent towards extreme right-wing ideologies. The affordances of AI, regrettably, align with re-emerging far-right politics, where ethnocentric exclusion is seen as a way to resolve the crisis of the system. Identity isn't simply made mathematically tractable by AI, but essentialized into a machinic identitarianism that prepares the way for a logic of eliminationism. The combination of crises like austerity and climate change create the conditions where transformative violence is not a flaw, but a feature, and states of exception become the response to unwanted social burdens. These are the emerging preconditions not just for technological solutionism, but for fascistic solutionism. So I'm suggesting we need an anti-fascist approach to artificial intelligence. In the second half of the book, I try to outline some possibilities for resisting and replacing both the apparatuses of AI and the assumptions that they're built on. If we take seriously the idea that the apparatuses of AI don't just describe the world, but help to produce it by establishing relations of becoming between subjects and representations, we need new ways to think about boundaries that aren't based on absolute divisions between observer and observed. I take as a starting point feminist standpoint theory because it undermines AI's abstract authority and its claims to objectivity by foregrounding experience from the margins. Getting to the root of the AI's power requires shifting from representations to a more process-oriented perspective by foregrounding experience from the margins on the way specific exclusionary practices are embodied and embedded as specific material configurations. I'm suggesting we can tackle the relentless sedimentation of difference by taking relationality as prior to the things that are related and recasting the question of AI as a matter of care. Reversing ideologies like scale, which is so totemic in Silicon Valley. It's really a fusion of virtualized infrastructure and speculative finance into a fetish for accelerated abstraction. Prioritizing instead vulnerability, embodiment, and interdependency. Redirecting attention to neglected things and devalued doings as a basis for developing counterpower. A tactic that enacts this is mutual aid, the reciprocal activity of sustaining each other against the kind of neglect and division amplified by AI. Mutual aid challenges AI's exclusions, both practically and philosophically, embracing entanglement not only as a reaction to need, but as a transformative way of relating. This transformation, as far as AI is concerned, starts in the workplace, as AI itself would be absolutely impossible without the decades-long destruction of the labor movement. That's what made available both desperate crowd workers to label the data and Amazonized workplaces where bodies do the bidding of algorithms. Now, we've seen the stirrings of dissent amongst some tech workers who realize they're creating tools to harm people. And of course, amongst the precarious workers themselves who are already tyrannized by algorithms. But taking this beyond temporary reforms, I'm suggesting, means reviving historical forms of self-organization, such as workers' councils, tackling AI's automatized hierarchies with horizontal autonomy, reclaiming the agency that never really went away, despite the materialized myth-making of algorithms as autonomous capital, creating anti-bureaucratic spaces for self-education about the structures that generate neglect and for an unmediated engagement with their transformation through the production of solidarity. The goals of workers' councils on AI, like the Lucas plan of the 1970s, would be to go beyond resistance to reimagining, restructuring production from the base level to change the kind of world that is in turn produced, diverging from AI as we know it in the same way that the Lucas Committee's solar cell technology, this is back in the 1970s, diverted from making components for fighter jets. The very generalizability of AI, the generalizable solution machine, creates the potential for a more generalized resistance. If the whole of society becomes subsumed in algorithmic ordering, which we're a good way there, we need to question the totality of social relations. If the whole of society AI's extractivism of everyday lived experience means extending resistance to social reproduction in the form of people's councils on AI, in housing, mental health, schools, and communities. There's plenty of talk in AI ethics about centering the voices of the marginalized. People's councils on AI are an attempt to give this some political traction in the face of powerful vested interests. For me, people's councils on AI are a practical form of standard theory. They're a militant application of post-normal science, countering algorithmic reductionism with the irreducible complexities of everyday life, developing a critical pedagogy that learns against the machine, interrupting AI's circuits of solutionism with a technopolitics of collective care, learning how to grapple with algorithmic harms while unlearning dependence on the structures that legitimize AI in the first place. Workers and people's councils on AI are self-constituting assemblies that reject the recursive subjection of representation that's so critical to AI itself, and instead become movement-building mechanisms for the community constraint of machine learning. An anti-fascist approach to AI isn't only a refusal of reactionary solutionism, but a call to replace it with mechanisms that invert the state of exception. Relearning through a rejection of today's obnoxious machines. That historical Luddism wasn't regressive, but a refusal of mechanically mediated power that degraded the possibility of community. We need to put down what the Luddites called machinery hurtful to the commonality, and embark on forms of structural renewal based on relations of reciprocity, reviving abandoned technopolitics, like socially useful production, with its integration of industrial and community struggles, and revisiting Illich's vision for convivial technology, infrastructuring the kinds of solidarity economies that create intercooperative and self-expanding systems through democratic self-governance and a commitment to system change. In the book's conclusions, I suggest that AI's exclusions are always forms of enclosure, and they're most effectively countered, not by inclusion, but by the commons. The struggle to resist algorithmic repression is part of recomposing collectivities that participate in constituent relations to re-establish commonality. This commoning is the action of taking aspects of the world back into common governance. It's a refusal of segregation and an assertion of the common good. We're faced with a situation where our most advanced forms of technology are busy sedimenting the potential for fascistic futures against a backdrop of climate collapse. Instead of the exponential scaling of carbon-emitting modeling, we may already have more computing than we need. A free society is its own performance of unfolding complexity, whether or not that involves digital computation. However clever these systems appear to be, they will always fail on a social level because they rearrange and reduce rather than reimagine. And they will never recommend liberatory social change. So I'm calling instead for forms of computation that are part of a sustainable alternative, which replace optimization with commonization and support our ability to adapt by devolving power to structures of emancipation. That's it. Thanks very much.
So much, Dan. It's pretty fascinating. There's so many things in my head, but I'm going to hand over to Adrian Smith, who's from SPRU.
Yeah.
I don't have a bio for you.
No, don't worry. Yeah, should I come and say a few
yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Very kind of articulate statement. And I think so. Ben asked me to say a few things of this as they discussed them. Hello, everyone online. Yeah, thank you. So, picked up the book again, I really enjoyed, and made a few notes to say in response. So actually, what I was going to say, you've kind of provided a great summary of the book in a very articulate way. I come to the occasional Humanities Lab seminar, but most of you won't know me. I'm a researcher at the Science Policy Research Unit, as you said. I think the reason I'm here and the reason we connected is I do research. Part of my research there has looked at a variety of alternative technology movements, current and historical, one of which Dan alludes to in the book and just mentioned now, which is the whole Lucas Plan and the workers' organisation of socially useful production in the 1970s and 1980s. And I think that's probably why I'm here, more than as someone who has been paying close attention to AI, machine learning, and its problems and challenges, if you like. So for me, what I really appreciated from the book, given my ignorance around the technology, was the first part where you go into the nuts and bolts and demystify and kind of point the absence of clothes on this, you know, and the sort of hype, and then also the origins of the technology, you know, the dominance of military funding and militarized trajectories and so forth. And so that's really, really useful. And it's violence, really. And one thing, though, is when you were talking about this AI, and so this might be one of my kind of questions, is it's this thing, these techniques, if you like, or fairly coherent techniques. And I'm just, again, with my ignorance, I wondered if it was as kind of coherent or as singular as your critique seems to make out. I mean, I was persuaded it is, but that maybe come through in some of my questions as well. And then, as you said, with the second part of the book, some kind of looking to theories and approaches to technology we see in STS, which is a field I work in, but other kind of sort of social science and humanities sort of approaches to technology. And as you've said, feminist standpoint, sort of new materialism, post-normal science, to kind of identify principles, maybe, or almost, principles. I was going to say design criteria, but clearly what you were just saying is much more than that. Principles for mobilizing resistance, but also alternatives. And the idea of workers' councils, again, as I said, how we connect. Things like commons-based peer production, which is another movement I've been interested in trying to follow. As trying to come up with these imaginaries. So that gets me to my questions, and then I'll let everybody else kind of come in. I don't want to hog the floor. I just wondered, though, Dan, given your kind of roots in activism yourself as well, and doing, you know, computing with young people in Kosovo and so forth, where you saw the sort of seeds or sort of mobilizations currently, maybe, if you could make, are there kind of examples you can point to where this resistance is organizing currently, and who's involved in the kind of reimagining and how it could build? So they may not have all of these, embody all of these principles you set out in your kind of program for resisting AI, if you like. But yeah, maybe you could kind of illustrate or point to where that's sort of happening. I thought, given that I'm here in the Humanities Lab, I wondered how the arts and the humanities, maybe even social sciences can, or, you know, the academy can help with that, perhaps, or is already helping. So those are two questions, yeah. Third would be about how to deal with current technology policy and institutions, you know, this industrial power that's going into AI. Is this about building up parallel institutions and, well, you say, you know, counter power? At what point, if any, do you engage with those, you know, the powerful agendas and research programs or neighborhoods that are going to be turned into smart districts and etc.? Yeah, so the kind of the points of encounter or engagement. So that's 3 questions. That's probably plenty to be going on with. I did note, though, Bristol University Press, who published the book, also did a really interesting book recently by, what's his name? Bihois, French, Philippe Bihois, called The Age of Low Tech, which kind of sets out, well, you're saying maybe we've got too much computation. Maybe we need, for the sake of the environment or society, we need a speed limit on the internet or such things. And I wondered whether, chatting with the person who translated The Age of Low Tech and saying, you know, France, there's some students, and there's sort of, I guess also where some of the ideas for degrowth were kind of revived, if you like, whether there's stuff going on there in not just imagining alternative computation, but looking beyond it or around it at lower tech things. So that's it. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to respond. I look forward to what Dan said with them 4 questions, and more importantly, what everybody else has got to say. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
So you can say that. So we have, just to say, we have the L on, which is our AI power of the L. So that can say there, and it'll pick up people in the room as well. So you know, so.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, thanks, Adrian. Yeah, feel free to butt in if I've forgotten questions or misinterpreted it. I mean, one question that you kind of kicked off with is around this idea of whether in the book AI is presented as a bit more coherent than it really is, or is it really this kind of, you know, I'm in some ways trying to paint a target on the back of something. Is there a thing there to paint a target on the back of? And I would say kind of yes and no. I think it is very, it in itself is very fluid. You know, I try to embed myself to some extent within the AI movement as well. And it's very dynamic, and it's not without self-questioning, right? Up to a point. Okay, and there are some really strict limits on what kind of questionings are really acknowledged within the AI movement, but it's very dynamic. And you know, the more how would you say, the more sophisticated part would recognize a huge range of these problems. There's a report out called something like the 100 years report on AI. I think it's called something like that. In fact, they plan to produce one report every 5 years for 100 years on AI, which in itself is very interesting if you think about it. It comes out of Stanford. If you read that report, it's a great introduction to AI in general. It's a great introduction to the full range of, if you like, orthodox critiques of AI. You know, they recognize racism, they recognize the fragility and brittleness of AI, they recognize adversarial examples, all this kind of stuff, and they are, you know, reasonable people. You could have a coffee with them. You know, they're trying to make this thing, but underlying all of that, at the very least, this isn't the only limit to that critique, would be, so they would represent in some ways quite a dynamic and open-ended field. I don't think they'd be trying to limit what is AI, but they would have a commitment to AI, whatever that is, right? Which is kind of interesting. They're kind of committed to AI, whatever it turns out to be. You know? And I think it's very similar to the way people are committed to the state, whatever form it takes. But they're committed to the idea that there must be a state. The AI practitioners are committed to the idea that there must be AI. You know, reality without AI, or the future without AI, is literally unthinkable. And they would probably think that in both senses, right? It's unthinkable in that it's impossible to imagine, but also that we need AI to think it. So whatever AI is, there's a commitment to it. I'd also say that whatever AI is actually a bit like what we got, in that it's basically a bit crap. It doesn't work very well, causes a lot of collateral damage. Nevertheless, we seem to be stuck with it. You know, we work in universities, most of us, some of us at least. You know, that's a pretty good description of a university organization, right? From the point of view of people trying to do the job that the university is allegedly there for, these are appalling arrangements of power and administration. They you know, they very rarely deliver what they claim to do, and cause a lot of waste at the very least in the process. That's pretty true of every other institution we've got. It's no surprise that AI does that. It's no surprise that AI is incoherent, irrational, inconsistent, varying. And yet underneath it all, it has a hegemony. It sustains. It controls in the same way that these institutions do. So yeah, I mean, you know, I don't want to make out that AI is incoherent, because that would make it far more limited than it actually is. It encompasses, I don't know exactly how I describe what I've just said, but it encompasses a belief system, you know, a set of practical techniques, and some, I think, underlying psychosocial commitments, let's say, to what is an understanding of reality and what shouldn't be considered maybe. On a more positive note, sort of thing, where are the seeds of mobilization? Well, obviously, I'm trying to stir things up as hard as I can. I do find myself looking back to the 1970s and 80s, a bit like Adrian, really, for more mature technopolitics, actually, than currently exists. I think that the range of understanding technology as political and its integration with, or its interfaces with other things that we more overtly think of as political, were perhaps erased, in the same way that many other conceptions of how to organize society were erased in that period since, I don't know, we generally call neoliberalism or whatever. It has an ahistoricizing effect and erases a lot of thoughts about technology. So personally, I often look back in order to look forward. But if there are places at the moment, there are specific organizations. Most of the resistance around AI is around resistance to specific things, and that's absolutely fair enough. That's how I imagine. I imagine it as being resistance to specific things, not a sort of generalized anti-AI movement, but resistance to what it's doing in housing, or resistance to what it does to students, or resistance to how it works in terms of facial recognition. And that's where, that's where things kind of are actually mobilized at the moment in relation to a form of machine learning. You've got organizations like Stop LAPD Spying, which are really community-oriented, community-rooted organization that are specifically contesting facial recognition and other AI forms of surveillance within, minoritized communities in the LA area. They have a really good critique. They have a really good contestation practice. They have, rooted community politics. The other seeds of potential opposition to, the kind of needy there opposition to AI, I would say I like the really obvious ones because they're the movements of our time. That'd be like Black Lives Matter, any of the movements around climate change, because AI is promoted. And not only is AI, an extremely carbon emitting technology by its nature, it's also presented as a solution to climate change, right? It's the ultimate, it's one of the engines of technocratic solutionism towards climate change. So I think it's pretty inevitable that real climate politics will have to contest AI if it isn't already. The concern I have, which is why I'm kind of why I wrote the book, and partly why I wrote the book, and why I'm trying to accelerate that process slightly, is because I fear that by the time that becomes clear, the AI will already be enrolled and embedded as part of a kind of the kind of fortress Europe that we already see, where the bodies are already floating in the sea, and that's a bit late. But definitely, any existing social movements that are in some ways challenging status quo power structure in whatever way are going to be impacted by AI, and I think therefore will find themselves having a politics on AI of some kind, including anti-fascism. How can the Academy help? You tell me. We're here. That's a good start. How do we deal with the current policy institutions? Yeah, well, for another bit of work, I had the recent pleasure of reading about 500 pages of European Commission policy papers on AI. Yeah, really interesting. Anyone else into that kind of stuff? That is hardcore. You read between the lines there. Again, they're one thing. The people putting those things together have kind of read the critiques, and they're putting in lots of stuff about. They've got the Council of Europe, piping up for human rights, and let's make sure that we include everybody, and blah blah blah. There's a real vision there, actually, of not just an AI-powered Europe, but Europe almost as a giant AI in some way, where the whole population, especially the youth, is fully integrated to become the digitalized skill workers that Europe needs. And really behind it, when you sort of scratch the surface, as far as I can see, and it's pretty much black and white, European digital sovereignty and all this kind of stuff. It's basically about economic power, obviously, they're betting the bank on AI, and it's geostrategic power. This is how it's like always China, Russia, China, USA, China, USA, China. We've got to be Europe, European AI, because we want to be in the game as well. That's it. So what do we do about that? What point do you engage? I mean, I'm not maybe the right person to put in any kind of negotiating committee in general of these kind of things. I think that would be fair to say. And of course, there has to be negotiation. The problem at the moment is there isn't any negotiation between different sets of interests, right? This is just a rollover. This stuff's been decided in the corridors of power, wherever you're talking Whitehall, the people doing universal credit or the people doing European Union's AI strategy, these things are already decided and they don't care what you think. They don't care what I think. Okay, so it's not really a matter of where do we engage. It's like, how do we do something about that situation where we are literally irrelevant? Which is why I'm suggesting that for many reasons, not just for sort of political tactics, but in order to be coherent with what we claim to assert as an alternative set of values, that the kind of things that we do as part of contesting that reality are consistent with the values and politics and principles that we are claiming to want to reclaim. So inclusion and diversity and justice and fairness and autonomy and all of those things. If we're going to reclaim those things, we need to do those things. And we negotiate as far as we can continue to do those things. And where they say, no, you're going to have to give up on those things in order to negotiate, that's probably where we should stop negotiating. But right now, we're not even in the room. On the low tech side, yeah, I totally agree with you. Maybe, and this is why I don't really know the history well enough, but one way this is a bit different to the alternative tech movement or whatever, is that it's not about the tech actually in that sense, or rather it's about, if there's one thing I didn't really write that much in the book, but I think it's really about, is this idea of technopolitics. There's this idea that politics is always technopolitics. That's to me what the Luddites represent, right? That's politics has always been technically mediated. Politics was never purely representational. It's never purely about a matter, I would say, never purely reducible to a matter of economic power relations or property relations. Of course, those things are absolutely vital, but it's not reducible to that. It's always been influenced by, moderated, mediated by the specific kind of machines that are, that are holding up any given society. So we need a politics of the machines with the politics that we do. And that's what I'm trying to say is kind of, I think that's always true, but I think it's really true with AI. So I'm trying to say, yeah, lower tech. I'm a less tech person, even though I'm clearly quite nerdy and I like computers. But in general, I think for many, many reasons, the only possible future is one with far less of it.
Thank you. Amazing. Okay, I'm just going to check and see if there's any questions online, but I'll open up the floor to questions as well. So if anyone online wants to send a question, please do so in the chat. And I'll open the floor to questions in the room.
Hi, thank you for the overview. I actually wanted to ask if AI is garbage in, garbage out, and if AI is an amplifier of differences in society and negligence, and we need to focus more on care and decency, then given the AI is mirror, then is it possible to fix AI first before we fix the society that is actually that garbage that will need that AI? So if we do not human beings, we do not orient ourselves with more decency, with more care, then no matter how perfect tool we get, if it's a tool or instrument, as I said, instrument that is built, then we will misuse it anyway, if there is a malicious intention to do so in favor of exclusionary, because it profits me or somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Well, I don't know if that's what you think. You're asking if it's possible to do it one without the other, and I would say absolutely no. That's kind of what I'm arguing, and I think AI is, I take AI seriously. I try to take AI seriously as a specific technology that is powerful. I'm not dismissing AI. But I'm saying, that AI is a moment a bit like COVID-19 was. And with COVID-19, But, and this is maybe where we can also see the limits of it. You know, if you remember only a couple of years ago, everyone was going, oh yeah, care workers, they're really important, aren't they? Oh yeah, and the people who stack shelves in supermarkets, we really need them, don't we? They're really valuable. Unfortunately, that was a, you know, somewhat transitory set of commitments, which is, you know, what I'm really saying here, that AI is a similar moment, exactly because it's a mirror of society in some way, or rather it's the sedimentation and amplification, not simply a mirror, more like the mirror in a laser cavity, you know. So it's an intensification of the need to recognize not that those things are the same, you know, not that there's a kind of, it's simply saying, oh, it's just capitalism, what would you expect? It's like AI is a very concrete thing. And as Adrian was saying in the first part of the book, I'm trying to talk about, well, exactly what AI does. This real AI, what does it actually do? What can it do? Because I started off writing the book, my working title was AI for the people. And I was trying to say, okay, we've got this AI technology, it's clearly in the hands of, you know, deluded Mars-oriented plutocrats, you know, maybe we better have like a, you know, a people's version. And actually my own sort of conclusion from writing the book and, you know, really getting kind of deeply into AI in a way is that that's absolutely impossible and irreversible. And this technology as it currently exists is absolutely antithetical to pretty much everything I personally value. So that doesn't mean that to me that any form of computation is. So what I'm trying to do is advance both of those things at the same time, you know, to say if we know that society that we live in is very underserved and well, okay. I just thought of another thing that occurred to you when you were asking the question, is that actually all of the other activity already exists a lot of it, and people are being cared for. You know, it's a massive struggle. It causes people, you know, to have depression and sort of have breakdowns of their own trying to do it. But it already happens. You know, people sustain, people survive, people care. But it's mostly that's mostly kind of weaponized against by the way society actually structures itself, by most of the things that happen. So I guess what I'm trying to do is valorize those activities in a way that gives them some kind of collective strength and seeks at the same time any possible forms of computation that might support that.
Thank you.
Then can I maybe ask the same question in a different way? So you pick up on that garbage in, garbage out analogy. We understand that if you put racist historical data in AI, churns out amplified racism. But if we lived in a different society where the people with sharing power were beneficent people, and if instead of garbage in we put in beautiful data, would artificial intelligence still be fascist?
Just going to write some things down, I forget. No, it's funny that you ask it in that way, in the sense that among the more thoughtful practitioners, maybe practitioners is not the right word, but people within the industry who are trying to get some control over the runaway train, the idea of counterfactuals is like pretty big. You know, they're looking, because obviously AI is mainly based on correlation, right? That's what makes it essentially a conspiracy machine, you know, which clearly is very concerning if it occurs at a time when conspiracy itself is the, you know, emerging dominant means of explaining society in the first place, right? So it's a conspiracy machine, and people know it. And so they're trying to develop various ways of ad hocing causality into it in some way. And counterfactuals are popular kind of field now. I don't think that they wouldn't do the counterfactual of different social structure, because they don't do that stuff, right? But that's kind of funny, because yours is the kind of counterfactual. I mean, I am arguing that AI is the AI that we know it. I suspect kind of wouldn't work in a society like that. You know, it wouldn't emerge from a society like that, and it wouldn't work in a society like that. So in a way, it's a kind of for me, it's a kind of null hypothesis that if you had a society like that, you wouldn't have AI in the first place. It wouldn't be possible to make it. There wouldn't be seen as any need for it. And if you did have it, it simply wouldn't work. And I think it wouldn't work because it is essentially a reductive and essentializing device of technology, which would be the kind of thing that such a society would presumably in some way arm itself against. And that's what I'm saying about the garbage in, garbage out. That's an easy thing to say, and it's an easy thing to kind of try to mitigate. It's possible to mitigate actually in this society, but it's an easy thing to try to mitigate and therefore keep the whole thing on the road. And it's not the problem. It is a problem, but it's not the problem. The problem is actually what AI does. Okay, AI establishes toxic forms of social relation. Sorry.
Yeah, on the subject of AI for the people, I was wondering if you're saying from the book about the Cybersyn project in Chile in the 70s, which was, the rhetoric was that this was AI in the service of social goals, but it was brought from the back forward, of course, by the, the Chilean Air Force and people like that. But on the other hand, it also was a very centralized model under the direct direction of the executive, the populist executive. Do you think that is a kind of hopeful model for the future, or is it a kind of blind alley?
So yeah, so people have heard of Cybersyn. It was an experiment under the socialist Chilean government that lasted until the Pinochet's coup in 1973. So for about 1972, 72, Stafford Beer and associates were invited by the Chilean government to try to apply some of their cybernetic methods to restructuring, basically the Chilean economy, I think, pretty much. And I think it's a really interesting. These things are so kind of historically nested, because that stuff was kind of literally blown up. That was the founding moment of the kind of the order that we currently live in, neoliberalism. That was the founding coup, if you like, that established the Chicago schools as dominant driver of sort of economic and political logic. I personally really like Andrew Pickering's book, Cybernetic Brain. So everyone's read it. Yeah, I think I'm not particularly like a fan of like Stafford Beer's actual conceptualizations, but I think and Andrew Pickering, there's a book by Andrew Pickering called Cybernetic Brain, and it looks back to this kind of what he would say is a sort of lost history of British cybernetics mostly, actually, rather than the sort of American, DARPA financed cybernetics, but a kind of typically eccentric British cybernetics or whatever. But within that is the stuff that isn't so eccentric, which is, radically different epistemologies where you're working with complexity without trying to kind of rein it in. What deep learning does, why it's rocks people's boats. They go, oh, wow, look at this, it can deal with complexity. Those things that we couldn't develop a heuristic rule set for. AI can deal with it. We just pile the data into this, this deep learning network and it'll give us results. And we finally conquered the problem of complexity and all that, basically, sort of feeling. That's the vibe. And I think there's a potential for approaching that, complexity in a way that doesn't reduce it. It doesn't seem to explain it. It doesn't try to make it transparent. So it's a kind of, it's very different actually to the positivist scientific model. That's why I'm trying to also articulate in the book that when we look at AI and we look at AI as ills, if you like, they are really just a very visible manifestation. They're a coherency mechanism for a lot of things that are already a problem. The way that we try to tackle knowledge production in general, the forms of knowledge production that we think are valid, and the expertise that we bring to bear in doing those things, maybe where the academy comes in, that all of those things are the foundations for this very particular weaponized problem, which is AI. So in order to really think about what could we do differently, we probably need to think about those things as well. And I don't mean spending ages thinking about it and then like 50 years doing something about it, but I mean the thinking and doing, the praxis has to be from a different starting point. And so I personally actually think cybernetics does have some potential mileage in terms of, if we're looking for forms of computation that actually assist adaptation conditions of uncertainty and irreducible complexity. I mean, that sounds pretty much like where we're already at, if we're not certainly heading there.
Is there anyone in the room who has a related question? Just because is it related to?
It is.
Yeah, okay, go on. And then I'll come to people online. Sorry.
Yeah, it's quite funny actually, with very related to sort of counterfactuals questions. So I was thinking about the consequences of what you were saying as the properly sort of realist social science. I was kind of thinking of work in empirical economics and stuff, to sort of make properly causal claims, how do we assess their validity, how do we pass out the really complicated situation in terms of the actual causal factors, just the associated factors. I mean, it sounded like a little bit, especially when you were sort of talking about counterfactual at the end there, that you are quite pessimistic about the whole project. I mean, so is what you're saying, does it have the consequence that actually just the sort of drives the realist social science, where we actually can pass those things out and make real causal claims? Is that just kind of folly, or I mean, is it that pessimistic what you're saying or not?
I don't feel that pessimistic. Yeah, I mean,
Or maybe I should this I probably didn't fully. I mean, because those things are going to be based at some level on correlation, and then
Sure,
yeah. On correlation about what the likely causal factors actually are. Then that's that connection.
I mean, I think this is where, like, for me, and I don't go into it too much in the book. I try to, I try to explicate it as much as I think is kind of relevant to the overall argument, if you like. But one of the things that I'm trying to address is the scientific basis of AI, if you like. So I'm at some level, I think AI is a bit of a scam, actually. On the same level that blockchain is, but on another level, it's manifesting a particular epistemology, or trying to, and it's trying to claw its way back there, actually, and I work, I collaborate very closely actually with AI practitioners and robotics practitioners, and I try to do that with respect, and I think those people are, they would see themselves as doing science. Not even social science, they see them actually doing science. So I suppose that's again why I find kind of both solace and sort of generative capacity in things like feminist post-colonial critiques of science, because I think they take those things on and they don't say throw the baby out with the bathwater. They don't say we're anti-science, let's all go and join the anti-vax movement or something like that. They absolutely don't say that. They say absolutely there's a place for properly scientific empirical methodology. I'm really down with that. But what I'm not down with it is the exclusive hegemony of that as a way of knowing. And I wouldn't even sort of necessarily put this at the door of science. It's science itself emerged at the same time as the economic system that we currently have, at the same time as empire. It's all kind of, for me, I wouldn't say I'm the best person to clear it up, but it's all wrapped together. So whatever you want to call that, reductive scientific approaches, I think, are a problem in that sense, and in general, probably more relevant in this area would be just the general idea that the market's a solution to things. That's a solutionism in its own way. So I don't know whether this addresses your unease at all. But I'm very personally, I don't think this is contesting the very validity and usefulness of properly empirical methods, of causality itself. It's just trying to evade the reductive imperialism of knowledge as well as practice. And I think that's again why I'm like, in the book I borrow from Karen Barad. Because I think that does extend to even our ideas of materialism. So I think, but I don't, I'm not like clearly not a philosopher as such, and I don't think it's a matter of sort of retreating to the realms of philosophy in order to work the stuff out first. For me, this is about praxis. It's about going out and saying, okay, well, we contest these hegemonies. We need to act in the immediate term, and we'll try to create methodologies that open the process to the voices which are left out, which make it problematic in the first place. And that's why I'm quite keen on things like post-normal science, which again, it's like a million miles from saying let's throw science out.
I think it's really interesting that you keep coming back to kind of feminist standpoint theory and kind of feminist ethics of care, and just in thinking about kind of science in general and the kind of bias in science that feminism would have confronted in the 70s and 80s. You think about Donna Haraway, and then, you know, feminist SDS theory, and how that is a kind of a consistent way to challenge these things. So it's actually really refreshing to hear you talk about these things. So I'm going to just...
Can I make a quick point?
Yeah, of course.
Just to bounce off that, I mean, one of my, I think maybe more optimistic sort of sub themes would be that, yeah, you know, I think we're in a bit of a pickle as far as AI is concerned, and it's not looking good. But actually, a lot of the things that can help us get out of that hole are already there. Yeah. We don't have to reinvent lots of new AI theory or new social AI theory or something like that. You know, we understand already. It's just mobilizing a load of things that already exist in a machinic way. We've got the tools to deal with that. Yeah. We just have to resurface them.
Yeah. Revisit collective action and techno politics.
And feminism in general.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about collective care in techno politics, but actually, where's the collective care in society politics anyway? Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to come to just a couple of questions that are online, and I'll come back to the room. I've noted hands, don't worry, keep an eye. So the book is titled Resisting AI, yet the seminar is titled Disrupting AI. So terminology, this terminology, which could raise eyebrows from any of us who've experienced the usage of disruptive in, for example, the open business startup scene. And so was there a reason behind that decision to name it Disrupting AI?
I don't know. We took that decision. I did.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so maybe that's quite generative, actually. Yeah, because, you know, totally, it's like one of the things that you know, I was like saying about mentioning scale, this kind of you know, cult belief of Silicon Valley in this very concept of scale, and it's like that that particular fusion of tactics, virtualized machinery. I mean, real virtual machines, you know, in the AWS sense, Amazon Web Service sense, and venture capital is a disruption machine, you know, and its intention is to disrupt previously agreed social constraints, like a fair day's wage for a fair day's work and stuff like that. You know, that's kind of what it's there for. You know, so in that sense, disruption is definitely a dirty word. But I think disruption can be a very creative approach as well. I think probably in technopolitics we need a little bit more punk in a way. You know, a sense of a conscious allegiance to disrupting the status quo because it's clearly shown itself to be worthy of very little respect, and, you know, doing that in a way that's not destructive, you know, that's trying to put the pieces back together differently. So I wouldn't be faking it if I said I thought all of this before the word disrupting. You know, I don't know why we did it. I think it was just to make it a bit different to resisting. Okay. But I think it's okay. You know, I think because it shines light in both directions. I know, you know, if our interlocutor wants to sort of come back, that'd be fine. I mean, I think absolutely disruption is a dirty word, and it's in itself has become captured by Silicon Valley and means something very well anti-worker at the very least. But I don't think disruption itself is. I think disruption itself is definitely actually what we need a bit more.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you have a question? Yeah. So thank you for your presentation. I'm very interested in when you talk about the issues with AI are actually reflection of issues with with our society and our social topics, and just represented in another form. So what I'm thinking of is when we are sitting here today talking about this whole problematic AI issue at all, we do have some kind of privilege that we have sufficient knowledge of social structure, and we have sufficient technology literacy to understand what is going on at all. But there are also other people, probably the mass public, who don't have privilege like we do, probably are not using the technology, but are manipulated by the technology. And for them, what can they do? Or for us, what can we do for them?
Great. I like big questions. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I suppose I'm going to kind of start with the thing that I don't. I mean, in the book, you know, is meant to be a kind of takedown of AI, I suppose, in the first chapter, which could, you know, you could see as sort of useful thing in the sense of a sort of critical digital literacy. I don't think that's a bad thing. I'd like to see that become more widespread. I'd like to see people in, you know, organizations working for refugees have a literacy about bordering algorithms and the kind of decision being made. And I think that emerges. There are a couple of examples actually where, has anyone heard of robo-debt? Robo-debt, does that ring a bell? In Australia, you know, absolutely madness. It was an algorithm that ran for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, and it's not AI. It's not just like it's just like one level up from the spreadsheet. But it's an example well, it's an example in this case actually of the kind of critical pedagogy that people develop when they need it. Because what this was an algorithm that essentially did the crudest kind of thing. It tried to work out your earnings in relation to your benefit claims, and it did so by essentially averaging. So that even in months where you literally had no money coming in, if that was in some way you averaged an annual income over a certain level, it decided that you'd been a benefit cheat, even if you've been claiming money when you had literally nothing else coming in. The really neat thing Australia did, and I think this is a precursor, it's like one to watch, is that and I remember looking at it about 4 or 5 years ago and thinking, this is madness. They actually wrote into law that the algorithm had the, what do you call it, designated powers of the minister. So, you know, so it's not in the particular robo-debt legislation, it's one level up. It says in certain, you know, in areas where it shall be designated by the minister, the, calculative methods go by, I forget what I said, but basically, yeah, you know, it developed and it made that law, right? So if basically this system decided you were a beneficiary, you were a beneficiary. And I'm mentioning all this partly because it's an interesting example that's just come back into my mind, but I think it's an example that, and that was extremely painful. People had to, and it was, you know, a coalition of lawyers and community activists, and you know, I call them victims, the victims themselves, and various kinds of allies and media, journalists who eventually got onto it. You know, a whole coalition of people educating themselves about, well, what the hell is an algorithm? What is this algorithm doing? How does algorithm work? And reverse engineering, essentially reverse engineering it over a period of 5 years to the point where they did eventually. I mean, it was eventually there was inquiry. And that particular algorithm was stopped. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is the critical pedagogy, which is the thing that I kind of try and talk about in the book, will happen. I think it's good for. I mean, that's what I kind of see maybe like I could be doing. You know, I could be part of that process because I could help maybe accelerate the understanding of what these systems are doing. But I think the ethos behind what I'm trying to promote is the fact that people are already experts. Right? They're already experts in their own lives. You know, one of the pro-social applications of AI that I see, and you do see this around in the narratives, if you're kind of into the space at all, you'll see like, yeah, but you know, I know that, you know, okay, so AI is, you know, if we just let it run free, then it would be propagating biases, but simply the analysis of AI shows us the biases are there because it kind of reveals these things. And so we need to, for example, we need to more invest. You see Google's recent AI launch day thing, whatever they had recently, their latest developments, where it's all about global AI to find forest fires and find floods. And the same kind of thing. We can use AI to find social deprivation, and we can use AI to reveal. It's like, I'm not allowed to swear properly, am I? No, I won't swear. Okay? We don't need AI for that. Thanks very much. Okay, just ask people.
Yeah,
they know. They're already experiencing it. Okay, what they don't need is all the resources sucked into data centers and data scientists in order to reflect back to them a reduced version of what they already know. That's not going to fix anything, right? What is needed are structures. And this is where it comes into tying in to the way things already work that give those people already some more power in sorting out their own situation.
and it's deflection really as well, isn't it? I'll go David and then Irene.
I don't,
Hey.
apologies for me late, and apologies for already addressed my question, which you made in the first 5 minutes ago.
Yeah.
But first, I just wanted sort of to kind of push you a little bit on your argument. I just wondered, does AI exist? Because you know the term, the way in which you employ the term, it sounds a little bit like the 1970s notion of AI in terms of good old-fashioned AI. I think very few artificial intelligence researchers would actually frame what they're doing in terms of these all-encompassing systems. And therefore, if that's not what you mean more machine learning and the nuances of what these artificial intelligences are doing. And sometimes you talk about algorithms and computation as synonyms of AI as well. And I just think the specificity is really important there, because otherwise we suffer from a kind of ELIZA effect of assuming a kind of agency in the machine, as it were, that may not be there at all. And also, of course, we have to be careful of falling prey to what Weizenbaum called the artificial intelligentsia, who are clearly pushing this research program because of the large funding that they can have for it. Although it's very notable that after 50 years, whatever, the actual outcome of artificial intelligence is very poor compared to machine learning, which has been much more successful. And so there's a question about whether actually we need to apply some ideology critique in relation to artificial intelligence at all. Secondly, I wondered why you focus on an anti-fascist approach. I couldn't see, it wasn't clear to me why that would be an obvious way of approaching this technology, particularly as you said in your talk, that not all AI is fascistic.
No.
Right? So that's a kind of weird question. And so now my final question is more methodological. Well, in which case, empirically, how do we identify which artificial intelligence stroke machine learning systems are fascistic, and what kind of indicators can we use in order to understand this fascistic element of the reported AI?
Yep, great. Won't be a second. Thanks very much. So yeah, actually, it's funny you should say that, because the first 5 minutes was important. I mean, it really was, because only in the very restricted sense, I did say I'm actually talking about deep learning. I am actually talking about deep learning, and I mean, I hope it's a bit clear in the book. If it wasn't clear in the talk, I'm very much talking about the affordances of neural networks and reinforcement learning primarily. And so the remarks I make about correlationism, reductionism, that's my understanding of those actual technologies, in detail. And it's funny actually, because I think good old-fashioned AI, if you like, or whatever, heuristic AI, it's kind of that's another wing of the reform movement at the moment. I don't know if you follow. Does anyone read stuff by Gary Marcus at all? Right. So Gary Marcus, I think, would represent sort of a reform wing of AI. Which actually says, well, we shouldn't have thrown out the good old-fashioned AI, because actually it's really important for various reasons like causality and accountability and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, without it, this is all rubbish. Yeah. Did anyone see I was in Bristol on Thursday, and bad-mouthing Meta's experiments with pro-science or AI that does science. Did you see? It's a Galactica, I think it was called. If you blinked, you might have missed it, because it lasted about 4 days. Anyway, it was kind of funny because I was bad-mouthing it in the Q&A there, and it was taken down at almost the same time. Okay. So I'm taking my chance here to assert the curse of the seminar. So if there's anything you guys particularly want taken down, I think we should include it in the Q&A. And then you never know, it might happen. So Gary Marcus would say, this is a good demonstration. In fact, he was very volubly saying this Galactica thing is a good demonstration of why deep learning is essentially nonsense, because it's just correlationism. It's just absolutely no understanding of the world whatsoever. But he would say, we can correct that, and we can correct that by hybridization of deep learning and good old-fashioned AI. And I would, so in a way, I mean, there was a kind of element in your question, I think, about the sort of untidiness, perhaps, of some of my terminology, in relation to, I'm sometimes talking about deep learning or AI, by which I mean deep learning actually in this book. And when I'm saying AI, I mean the AI that we really have, the AI that's doing damage right now, which is deep learning and reinforcement. But I talk about also machine learning, and I talk also about algorithms, and talk also about computation. And I think I probably have, my reasons when I say those things. I mean, I say machine learning because I think it's a precursor. Machine learning examples, a bit like, Robodebt wasn't even machine learning, but things like Siri, the Dutch welfare rights legislation algorithm, that was machine learning. And I think it's good because I'm trying to be not the canary in the coal mine, but one of the principles, and this kind of circles back to your second point, but I'll get to that properly. One of the principles of anti-fascism is to stop fascism before it happens. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is incorporate some of the precursor examples of machinic systems doing the kind of things that I think AI will do by times 10 in the critique of AI. So I encompass some things that are machine learning, and that's basically where I stop actually. I don't just include any old computing or any old algorithm. I am talking about machine learning and deep learning. But I totally put my hands up to the fact that definitely when I talk, and possibly in the book as well, I sometimes sound a bit like I'm attributing agency to it per se. And I really don't mean that because I don't think that. But I do think that I think it's related to trying not to have a dualism about these things. That we, all knowing and doing is essentially, or I would try to understand it as inseparable from the apparatuses that we do that knowing and doing with: lecture rooms, chairs, microphones, and computation. And so I'm trying to approach the politics of those things in the same way. So I don't attribute agency to AI, but I do place AI within agentic activity in general. And as far as the AI intelligentsia goes, I have something to say about that, Drat. Because you were saying, just hit me with the intelligentsia bit again.
So Joseph Weizenbaum used to attack people like Marvin Minsky.
Yeah.
He considered them the artificial intelligentsia. But what they would do was always big up AI research to get money. The reality was, back then and now, artificial intelligence does not deliver. Machine learning does.
Okay, we can talk about machine learning, but definitely we agree on the deep learning doesn't deliver, right? Well, there's a great triple D, right? Deep learning doesn't deliver.
I'm not sure I would call deep learning like deep learning. I'll call it machine learning.
Okay, so what would you call artificial intelligence?
Well, artificial intelligence is the project of general artificial intelligence, i.e. a human-like mind produced that is artificially intelligent.
Yeah, we got a terminology thing going on. I mean, I call that AGI. Yeah. So I mean, it's just making the distinction a bit differently, totally. And most of the people doing AI are also into AGI, right? They really want to have machines to think, right? Somebody at my daughter's school this morning, how you get into these chats at school, and he was going, "Oh yeah, we had the Demis Hassabis in here, a couple of minutes ago. What a nice guy." He's the guy who co-founded DeepMind. And I was like, okay. So, I'm not saying he's not a nice guy, by the way, especially for since this is going out on the internet, he may well be, but he's definitely a believer in AGI, right? That in my mind makes it very problematic. Okay, and because AGI in my book is what I'm asserting, and actually a political project that has a fascistic side to it, actually. It definitely has a supremacist, eugenic, inseparable core content. But if I can just come back to intelligence a bit for a moment, I would say that I really do try hard when I'm talking about AI not to attribute capacities to it. I basically spend probably a little bit too much of the first half of the book just saying how crap it is. But I'm doing that not in order to say we don't need to worry about it, because every other power system that we've got is crap in the sense of how it effectively delivers what it says to do. I mean, current systems of government, current systems of provision of welfare, even I would say business on the whole, I've worked in large corporate structure, they're doing what they do things, but they do them in a really inefficient, incredibly wasteful, damaging kind of way. The fact that something is rubbish doesn't make it not dangerous. Being rubbish actually makes you a good fit for our current hegemonic systems. And so I've tried to do both things at the same time. I tried to say, yeah, this is pants, but we really need to worry about it. Why do I do that then with the subtitle of anti-fascism? Is for a few reasons, I think. Just wondering which one to come to first. I think first, if you sort of if you see technology as being in some way not a reflection of society exactly, but sort of emerging out of a society, and if you see large technical systems of one kind or another as playing an essentially transformative role, which I think they all do. I mean, databases did when they first came along. These things, whatever you want to call them, they do. They are part of an ongoing transformation. They have a kind of loop feedback effect and ongoing transformation. If you see them emerging in our times and you don't address fascism, then I think, honestly, you're missing something. Okay. I mean, this is on the rise, right? It's a very powerful political movement of our times, and we should be very worried about it. And so when we're talking about large-scale technical systems that have a transformative capacity, and we look at the social systems and the likely consequences of the particular crisis that we're facing, and we're not talking about fascism, then I think we should be. That's one reason why I am. The other reason I am is because what I'm trying to do is find a way to reconnect, because it's part of the way I think about this idea of technopolitics, try to reconnect, the forms of activity that happen around specific modes of computation in this case, and their resonance or corollary with larger scale social manifestations, such as political manifestations. So what I'm trying to say is, when I look at what deep learning actually does, I would say it is reductive, it's essentializing, it leans towards creating states of exception, it is violent in a transformative way, and it is identitarian in a way that makes it extremely amenable to connection with ethnocentrism or other forms of essentialist exclusionary operations. Right? That doesn't mean that AI is fascist. I don't say AI is fascist. What I'm saying is there's a technopolitics, okay, that all machinery has a kind of politics. It's not the same kind of politics that you tick on a box when you go to vote. It's political, and however we want to call it, I'm saying that the kind of technopolitics that AI has is a very close fit to an emerging kinds of politics in the world, of which the one that I'm choosing to elevate for concern, because I see such a close synergy between it and these operations, is fascistic activities or fascistic politics. Fascistic politics are a risk, and this is maybe the last. Well, another way to, and the reason for the technopolitics side is because think about the way the university structure. Let's just take it because some of us, well, you're all in a university right now, but I suspect a lot of you work in university, right? Think about the way that the ordinary structures of the university, the daily relations of roles and power in the university, influence our interactions with each other. How authentic can I be with you through this relationship, through relationships we might have in whatever authentic means, right? That's like how must I be with you? Let's put it the other way around. What roles am I, in a way, required to enact with you as a result of the organizational constraints and organizational roles and organizations' identities, and which are inseparable as well from how I feel about myself when I get up in the morning. They're also a matter of affect, also a matter of psychopolitics. These things are ever present. And what I'm saying is that AI does that as well. It's another technical mechanism. Bureaucracy is a technical mechanism. AI is a technical mechanism, and it does affect affect. It does affect micropolitics. It does affect our the immediacy of our interactions. So the kind of fascisms I'm also concerned about are like things that Deleuze-Guattari didn't use their analysis in the book, but they would call microfascism. The precursor interactions that make us all more susceptible to those larger scale political tendencies. So I'm trying to feel my way to that's. I'm trying to find a way to talk about technopolitics that also makes it psychopolitics as well as material politics, and try to question all its boundaries. Last reason why I'm throwing it all at you, throwing it at the wall, is is the nature of fascistic politics, which is that I'm saying I've kind of said this, but fascism in danger, but the particular reasons why it's in danger, right? It's because I would what's his name, Robert Paxton. Robert Paxton's book on fascism has probably the best breakdown for me. What the recipe you're looking for, if you're looking to worry, is the existence of fascist political movements and ideologies, social crisis, and ruling elements, whatever you want to call them, who are having a bit of a crisis themselves, right? Who are concerned about their hold on power. I think we could tick all those boxes right now. So that's why I say we need an anti-fascist approach to artificial intelligence. But your mileage may vary, as they say.
I'm just aware that we're a little over time, but if you bear with us for another couple of minutes, I know we did start a little bit late, so I just want to come to Irene, and then we'll have one more question, I think, from the online.
I feel like you said kind of
No.
next person. But I feel the question that I wanted to ask Dan was not really, because I'm trying to find not only I appreciated that you brought up a lot of feminist science and technology studies into your analysis of AI, and I think there is a strong movement, I think, of feminist writers now that are talking about AI. But I also wanted to sort of touch on the idea of technopolitics and sort of ask you if you're also considering feminist politics as well as feminist theory. So if I should think of feminist politics, for instance, the question of literacy, for instance, would be something closer to consciousness raising, right, as opposed to literacy. So you're not teaching people, you're instead raising up their consciousness, and as you said, they are already aware of something, right?
Right.
So I wanted to ask you about feminist politics, if you're engaging in that in your analysis as well, and in what ways you're engaging in that as well.
Yeah, I think it's more kind of maybe for me it's more what lies behind the kind of things I'm trying to propose in the book. I mean, as much as it's in the book is probably as much as I've kind of name checked, that I'm saying those things, standby theory and relationality and all that kind of stuff. And I don't think I even use the term consciousness raising when I'm talking about, let's say, people's councils, but that's kind of what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that's because I think, based on my experience in a way, and that's just like my experience, which obviously is very, very particular and limited. That's the long-term effect that politics had on, I would call, let's say, radical, and in meaning wanting real change, radical political movements in general. I think that there was a transformation. I'm old enough to remember, when politics was largely oriented around varieties of Trotsky's group, and sort of who should our leader be, and which particular ideology is absolutely right, and all that kind of stuff. And I think the effect that feminist politics had was to reorient all political movements around, when you had what they sometimes call the movement of the squares, or the 2011, politics in general, the so-called, the Arab region uprisings and all that kind of stuff, that they all seem to me to manifest a feminist politics. They'd all kind of learned from that. And, the limits of my political sophistication are trying to bring that to bear on AI. But I hope that the necessity for connecting politics of AI to actually existing social movements means that these things will progress together. That actually requiring or positioning critiques of AI within living dynamic political movements who've already learned those lessons means that the advancement of the idea of technopolitics and the strengthening of those movements per se, because they are able to more effectively tackle one of the things that will be seeking to undermine those politics, which is AI, can happen at the same time. And I think it's right, because I think AI is such a, it doesn't matter how, it doesn't matter how many gender categories Facebook has under the hood. At the end of the day, these are mechanisms of rigid boundaries, and there can't be anything else. And if we've got a politics that is counterposing that with militant fluidities, let's say, then these things must be opposed to each other. I'm starting to ramble.
It's okay.
I think I've started rambling. Sorry.
Unless it's really quick, because I'm very conscious that you've been sitting answering so many questions, and we could probably sit here all evening. So Alice, is it really quick? Because
I was just going to say, just partly, thank you so much for your talk and for coming. You told me, I wanted to come back to it. If I sort of like one of the things that Adrian raised about, how do we tackle it? Can we tackle these things within one discipline or within one institution? What are the kind of arts, humanities perspectives on this? So I was just saying, this sort of picture of deep learning models, machine learning as black boxes, which just recapitulate and amplify patterns in the data. There's three kind of key approaches. I'd say there's three sort of gangs in music AI, particularly. One that I'm familiar with. One is this sort of meme machine, if you like. It says, we can compose stuff in the style of Bach or Beethoven, like. No actual composer wants to do that, right? And so in one sense, there is the sort of taking away jobs by making an AI for mastering your music as you do digital marketing, and that's the kind of fear-inducing thing. The other two are more positive, I think, and I wonder whether we can borrow from those as society more broadly. One is that musicians kind of like to abuse tools, right? So there's the nice ideas of sort of hybridity. So you train two models, and then you just cut them open and splice them together. So instead of just recapitulating patterns, you actually use it as an idea generator. You don't care about, so the boundaries get messed up. You purposefully remix models, if you like, just to generate some ideas, and you ultimately have all decide what to do. And the third one, which is probably what I have most experience in, is and what some colleagues here are exploring, is kind of embedding AI in instruments. And so you're basically just using it as a mapping. Okay, when I do this, I want to control a synth, or I want to do something with my cello. And then what you're doing is quite nice in the black boxes, because you're essentially inserting that model, generating a mapping by training it. Yeah, you don't know it in the ways you might know a heuristic algorithm, but you do come to know it in a more sort of cybernetic way, because you're performing with it, and you know it. You have a kind of tacit embodied knowledge of it, and those two, that kind of using it as a generative space and messing with it, and then building it within your kind of wider ways of knowing, feel quite positive and interesting to me, and maybe we can learn from those in other areas.
I mean, yeah.
I briefly want to pass to sort of like mostly agree, and sort of especially around this. I like the word cybernetic. I think, but really I do, because I think that's kind of, we want things to be a bit more cybernetic in that sense, where we're sort of messing with things without bothering to know, without the fact of what's actually going on inside actually being that important, And I just also want to give a shout out to a podcast called General Intellect Units, which do a lot of, especially the early ones on things like stuff appears, work and bickering. They're really good at that cybernetic stuff, But I also want to kind of lay down a sort of final bit of pessimism in a way. I think there's actually a danger at the moment in generative AI, in its apparent creativity. I'm just going to leave that there. That's actually a problem. That's another line which we're going, this stuff is creative. That means it can come up with alternative social solutions. No, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, well, we leave it on that pessimistic.
Finish on Dan. That's how we like to finish.
You to Dan.
On the subject of told you the book. You can maybe bring some down. Hey, I've got 4 copies, but one's already got dibs on them. So if anybody wants them, half price, £10. But I also have got, this is my sales pitch from the publisher. There's a discount code here. I'll read it out. PORAI 30. If you want to buy the book, it's PORAI 30. We'll get you 30% off from Bristol University Press, who print it.
Fantastic.
So,
Okay. Big thank you to Dan. Big thank you to Adrian. Thank you so much for attending. And
yeah.
Thank you to Alex.
And thank you to Alex for supporting all the tech. Absolutely. Okay. And everyone online, there's lots of questions online that we didn't get to, but it's the same in the room. But thank you very much.